C-Topher Central, it's the place to be. Enjoy yourself, why don't you? Greetings and salutations. Welcome to episode 4 of C-Topher Central. For those who've been keeping up with every episode, congratulations. And I also apologize for the bit of a time gap between this one and the last episode. I'm here to say that time gap was needed. Good things happen when you wait, or however the saying goes. But I'm not going to keep you waiting any longer, because now it is time for what you've all been waiting for. A story. A tale, if you will, in regards to a place known only as Elyerius. And in this land of Elyerius, there's a problem. A terrible, terrible problem. A problem that happens every 43 years. A terrible curse upon the village. But, with that being said, get settled, get some food, turn off everything else, because this is about to be your priority. So, let's get right into it. The land of Elyerius, a bustling city filled with merchants and craftsmen and artisans and blacksmiths and, most importantly, slayers of beasts for hunting purposes or for the protection of the town. All of the purposes and all of these occupations reside within the city. My apologies, did I say city? Ho ho ho. You may have realized, but this is not a modern day story. Oh no. This is the medieval era, filled with mythical creatures and stuff that we don't want to deal with in today's world, understandably so. And so, we have taverns and towns and all that fun jazz. But anyway, this village is plagued with a terrible curse. Every 43 years, they are attacked. I know, scary, but it's not just a regular attack. This is an attack from a wyvern with wingspans twice as long as dragons and the same serpent-like body. And what else? They're evil. They hate humans with a passion nonetheless. And so humans hate them. It's a natural thing. And so a war was waged between the humans and the wyverns. The dragons weren't here yet, so don't be thinking about the dragons. There's no dragons involved with the story whatsoever. This is between the humans and the wyverns, to which the humans absolutely decimated the wyvern population with a military like no other. But this particular wyvern, well, he put up a fight, earning himself the name Alaster, meaning tormentor, meaning that they had to deal with him for years and years and years. They just simply couldn't beat him. He was too mobile, too sneaky, too evil to die like the rest. And so, in the 42 years before he attacks, he resides in his cave, simmering in his vindictive nature of hatred. Which brings us to the present day. And by present day, I mean the present time period in which the story is taking place. Here we have our main characters. A woman named Seraphine and a boy. Well, he's a man, but he acts like a boy. His name is Thaddeus. But Seraphine and Thaddeus, will they bring change to the future? Or will they just die like the rest of those who dare defile Alastor? Well, you'll find out. The sad thing is, the town, well, they don't really like Seraphine and Thaddeus. They believe that Thaddeus is a very strong man and is very powerful, but that's about it. He's not the sharpest point on the pitchfork, but he has a lot of bravery, a lot of courage, a lot of heart. At a young age, his mother always reinforced the idea that he is the definition of heart, which only because his name means that. So he just took that and ran with it all the way. And he did a good job at that. But no one really relies on him for anything that requires any feasible amount of thinking. We'll say that. We will say that. As for Seraphine, well, she's smart. She's very smart. She's very capable. She's not weak. You know, she's a woman. She's grown up. Although, she has one very interesting weakness. She has too big of a heart, if that makes sense. She's too kind to everything. She's too sweet in times when she needs to be serious. But of course, why would that ever be a problem? I mean, after all, given the time period, sadly, women didn't have that much authority or power. And so, most of the village men, they just saw her as something to be there. A decoration. It's terrible. And she saw herself more than that. And Thaddeus, so did he. Which is why they got along. They didn't get together. It's not a romantic thing either. But they just hung out. You know, they were very good friends. They connected. They kind of complemented each other's strengths and weaknesses. And overall, they made a pretty good team. Despite this fact, nobody really gave a crap. Because all they really did for their village was clean out the stables. Not because they couldn't do more. I mean, as I said, Thaddeus, pretty strong, formidable foe. But, yeah, no one really trusted them with anything. No one really saw the intricacies and the nuances of their friendship, and so they never gave them the opportunity. It's very sad. It's very, very sad. So they took it upon themselves to control their own future, their own destiny, and they decided to kill the wyvern once and for all by themselves. Pretty stupid, I know. Like, people have been trying for centuries at this point with full-blown armies and militias and yada yada yada. What were these two gonna do? They're just young adults with, I guess, good synergy. But, I mean, hey, they were determined. And when people, get determined, it's really hard to stop them. And so the town bid them farewell, or at least they wished that the town did. The town did not give a crap about their The town did not give a crap. But the town, acknowledged at least that they weren't going to call into work tomorrow. And they left. They just up and left. Now, granted, they of course realized that they weren't going to be able to kill a wyvern with their bare hands, which meant that they grabbed some special weaponry. For Thaddeus, he decided to take with him the sacred family falchion blade, passed down from his grandfather, who tragically died during a wolf attack. How sad. And as for Seraphine, who is a rather pacifist person, and she likes to avoid conflict, but understands that it happens sometimes. So she brought with her a crossbow. But not just any crossbow. She got the crossbow from behind the dumpster. This was not a lazy decision on my part. This is not a spur-of-the-moment decision where I was like, oh crap, what's she gonna do? No. You know why she picked the crossbow from behind the dumpster? Because she thought with all of her heart that because it was considered trash, it would do less harm to whatever the thing she's shooting at. Which I just want you to let that sink in as to how much of a problem that is when it comes to, killing a mythical creature. But nevertheless, Thaddeus, he had some remarks about it, but regardless, they pushed on and they ventured. And conveniently, this is kind of convenient, a little cop out, but there was a quiver of arrows next to the crossbow. Okay, it was just there. Okay, work with me. Okay, just work with me. I'm gonna clarify this right now, because I know what you're thinking. Most narrators, they're supposed to be unbiased when they're telling a story like this, where they have no involvement whatsoever. I'm here to tell you, I'm not gonna be too biased, but I am gonna put my opinion on what happens. And yes, you're gonna live with it because it's gonna be my story and it's gonna be fun that way. You got that? Great. So now then, off into the forest they go. Can you smell that? The air of tranquility, the peace, the enchantment of the forest. It's beautiful. There's a river off to the east that seems to wind forever and ever off into the horizon. The glorious mountains with snow-capped peaks, and it's just a great forest. It's just a great forest. And here we have Seraphine and Thaddeus venturing forth under the canopy of the trees, looking around and seeing the birds flutter through the breeze, and the little forest goblins scurrying between the leaves. Hoo, poetry. And here we think, as Seraphine and Thaddeus travel through the forest, going nowhere in particular, other than the direction that they assume that the sacred wyvern would be located. They walk for hours, and hours, and hours. They eat a berry from a bush, and they continue to walk for hours and hours, occasionally resting and sipping water from the river. They think to themselves, where are we going? To which they don't have an answer. So they get up and keep going, and they keep going. And then guess what? They keep going. But after a while, they keep going. And they run into nothing because they have to keep going. I'm telling you, this forest is long and boring. It's enough to drive one to insanity. Thaddeus is beyond bored at this point, for he never had much of an attention span, and this is brutal for him. Seraphine, however, she's enjoying nature. She was always outside when she was a little girl, so this isn't really new to her. She interacts with all of the wildlife that she can find. The deer, the birds, the fish in the water. The fish kind of spit at her and swim off, but she tries. And once they even saw a jackalope hopping by. Thaddeus was horrified because why does a rabbit have antlers? But Seraphine figured it'd be just something that's beautiful and a truly positive and wholesome representation of how fascinating nature could be, or something like that. And so, night began to arrive. The sun began to set, and the moon began to rise. It was still beautiful, don't get me wrong, but there was a new danger in the air. For everyone knows that nobody should ever be caught in the forest at night. That is when the death and creatures of evil begin to arise. And we don't like that. We don't like that. Usually, they avoid heavily populated areas because of, humans' tendency to kill things. But, oh no, it's just Thaddeus and Seraphine, all alone in the forest. Realizing the severity of their situation, they decided to rest for the night. Seraphine lit a campfire beneath an old oak tree, surrounded by other trees for shelter. Neither of them knew how to build a bunker, but they took what they had. And while Seraphine was sleeping, and Thaddeus, let's be honest, he was partially dozing off, there was an attack by a whole entire pack of wolves. Dare I say, the very same wolves who killed Thaddeus, his grandfather, when he was just a boy. And so he rushed to Seraphine, trying to wake her up. Wake up! Wake up, he cried. Wake up! Wake up! The wolves are coming! But it was no use. She was too deep in slumber. She was exhausted from the day of hiking and climbing and just general walking. And so, it was up to him to defend his friend from the pack. They closed in very, very slowly, watching both of them with malicious intent. Thaddeus retrieved his falchion blade and stood on guard. Slowly, one by one, the wolves encroached closer and closer and closer. Thaddeus, being the fighter that he was, wasn't much of a killer, and so he was nervous. He was shaky, the sweat dripping down his forehead. He wasn't ready. He didn't think a day like this would ever come, that he would have to take the life of something sentient, beyond a bug. Oh, he was not prepared at all. And Seraphine, she was of no use. If Wolf got behind him, oh no, the horrors that would happen. He couldn't let it happen. He could not fail. And so, spontaneously, he lunged at the first wolf in front of him and plunged his blade deep into the wolf's throat, ensuring its death. The other wolves, aghast, took a step back and looked amongst each other, and then realized that they had the numbers advantage, and so they continued closing in with much more aggression this time. Though ultimately, it didn't matter. Thaddeus, with the adrenaline pumping through his veins, went ballistic, slashing all of them, left, right, behind, and front. All of it was just a blur of cuts and howls of wounds and pains. Ooh! Ooh! Somehow Seraphine slept through it all, but Thaddeus, fighting for his life, managed to take down most, not all, but most of the pack. By the end of the bloody battle, there was only 2 wolves left. Only 2. And these 2 happened to be the pack leaders. Not leader. Both of them were in charge. And let's just say that there's 2 leaders for a reason. Before Thaddeus could even react, they began doing a synchronized attack of sorts, where they began running back and forth, causing a blurred image. And without even realizing it, Thaddeus had lost his sacred weapon, for it was now in the mouth of the wolf. The wolf's partner took this opportunity and attacked Thaddeus, knowing that he had nothing to defend himself with. And so, they fought mano a mano, or rather, mano e canino. That was stupid, but anyway, they had to wrestle each other like they did in that one movie, Tarzan. They fought with nothing but their own strength and grit. It was a horrible battle. Utterly terrible. In the end, Thaddeus won. He had managed to kill the wolf with his bare hands. but at what cost? He lost his sacred weapon, and he was so freaking hurt. Like, his arm was broken, his legs cut and bruised, bleeding out. He looked like he fell off a roof. It was terrible. And the wolf that stole his blade had ran off, never to be seen again. And so it was a grim night for Thaddeus, as he laid there bleeding. He would live till tomorrow, but in utter agony the whole way through. The next morning arrived, and not a creature was stirring, except for Seraphine, who awoke to the horrors of the night before. Around her she saw corpses of wolves, and amongst them Thaddeus and his torn up body. He was alive, barely, but he was alive. He was unresponsive, though, unconscious. And so she cried. She cried a great deal. She cried for hours and hours. And then she stopped crying and got up and took action. She began searching for food and medical plants and herbs, just anything that all they could help. After a day or two, she came back, and Thaddeus was awake. He was conscious, but he wasn't the same. That fire that was inside of his soul, it was extinguished. He was depressed, gloomy, and he didn't want to move. And so he sat against the oak tree for days and days, eating the bare minimum and just resting, staring off into the horizon, contemplating and feeling ashamed for losing his family's sacred weapon. One day, as Seraphine was traveling down the river, she noticed a figure upon a rock. It was a dryad, which, if you don't know what a dryad is, they're essentially woodland spirits of the forest, and they take the form of human beings. That's all you really need to know. If you care more than that, look them up. But anyway, Seraphine noticed this dryad, and she looked mysterious, shady even, suspicious. But of course, Seraphine, being the girl that she is, she figured that it wouldn't be such a big deal because, after all, what's the worst that can happen? And so she walked up to the dryad, greeting it with much politeness. The dryad replied, "Hello. Could I ask a favor of you?" And Seraphine, a little confused, but overall pretty chill, said, "Sure." The dryad began to chuckle under her breath and looked left and right, making sure no one else was around, before she asked if she could see the crossbow that Seraphine had on her back. Now, as we know, Seraphine's a very peaceful person, and so she never really intended on using the crossbow, much less giving it to anybody. But nevertheless, she handed it over, with the quiver too. And so, as she let go, and it fell into the dryad's fingers, and a poof, the dryad was gone, with the eerie echo of a laugh left behind. And so Seraphine was alone, by herself, at the river, with no weapon in hand, and no dryad. From behind, a swirling pillar of leaves revealed the figure of another dryad. This one was different, and she had a very melancholy look on her face as she saw what happened from afar. She explained to Seraphine how that specific dread was actually the most devious, the most dangerous, and the most morally ambiguous of them all, for she had plans to cause great destruction upon the entire forest, specifically the Elven Kingdom, for she didn't like their long pointed ears. But that's another story for another time. As of right now, Seraphine was distraught, for she was directly / indirectly responsible for the calamity of a nation. She already had enough to deal with Thaddeus being out of commission and having to provide food every day. And now she could have brought a war. This was too much for her. Too much for anyone to bear. And now she was alone, with nothing but her own grief, her own sorrow. Ain't this sad? It's just sad. Days, weeks, months. Nobody really knows how much time had passed. Thaddeus and Seraphine forgot their entire mission. They forgot why they departed the village. They forgot everything. As far as they knew, they just lived there, out in the forest, by the grand oak tree. All day and all night, eating, sleeping, and resting. Their fire, doomed never to be lit again, for they gave up. Until suddenly, Alastair, the wyvern himself, flew by overhead and was making a beeline for their village. Seraphine and Thaddeus rose and beheld the horrifying creature in all of its stature. Oh, its horrible size, unearthly, unfathomable, intimidating. They climbed the tree, the grand oak tree, and witnessed its trajectory as they saw it decimate their village, for it happened to be the 43rd year. Elyerius was no more. The flames. Oh, the flames. It was horrifying, seeing their family, their loved ones, their hated ones, everyone perish at the hands, or rather, the wings, the claws, whatever they're called, the talons, there we go, the talons of Alastair himself. Nothing remained, and they would have been burnt to a crisp as well if they hadn't embarked upon this adventure. And so, feeling a sense of gratefulness and being reminded of the terrifying reality of their situation, that passion, that spark was renewed, and they realized that they had to pick up the pace. They were slacking, wasting so much time, sitting, being sick and weak. This is pitiful. From that moment on, both of them vowed to never, ever waste time in the manner that they did, being all injured, disgusting. There were more important matters at hand, and so they charged off into the forest, vigorously looking for the cave of the wyverns, so that, when the moment is right, they can strike. A sneak attack, if you will. Though they knew not where to go, they knew that as long as it wasn't nowhere, it was the right direction. And so they ran, through the trees, through the forest, through the rivers, across the mountains. They did not stop until they realized something terrible, something unforeseen, something quite obvious. They didn't have any weapons. With this dreadful realization, they had to stop. They couldn't continue on this quest. What were they gonna do? Nothing. They were just gonna perish. It was terrible. All of this effort, all of this running, all of the suffering, and they couldn't do anything about it. They rested, but not permanently. They just took a little time out, a pause. But they ever so happened to pause in the worst place possible. They paused in a swamp, and in this swamp lies a creature of true evil. The definition of conniving. A certain predator known only as a basilisk. And this basilisk, well, this one's a real crafty one. In the same swamp, you'll see dozens and dozens of statues of fallen warriors who have been killed, not at the hand, but at the eyes of this very same basilisk. For those who don't know, if you look into the eyes of a basilisk, you turn to stone. Simple as that. It's kind of like a legend with Medusa. And so, it's terrible. It's kind of an unfair battle, if you really think about it. But it's very possible. The basilisk looks like a lizard/serpent hybrid. It depends on your imagination, but it's a big thing. It's a big thing. It will eat people. It will do all the things. A wyvern is much stronger, of course, but, never underestimate the basilisk. Well, as for Seraphine and Thaddeus, they didn't even see it, for it was hiding under the marsh. It was very sneaky. It was planning a surprise attack. And poor Seraphine, she never even knew about the existence of a basilisk. Only Thaddeus knew from his father, for his father was also an adventurer and told many stories of creatures from far and wide. It began to slowly slink closer and closer to the bear, trying to find the perfect angle to launch its attack. With precision and timing and patience, it could easily take a bite out of Thaddeus' leg. But if it wasn't for Seraphine's scream of terror at the sight of the beast, well, this had been a very different story. And so, they were on guard now, for they acknowledged its existence and its presence. But they had no weapons. What were they going to do? They couldn't kill it. Even if they worked together, it was too strong. Poor Thaddeus, still kind of recovering from his tangle with the wolves, and Seraphine not being much of a skilled fighter, they began to run. Thaddeus collected a fallen sword. Wow. He collected the sword from a fallen warrior. The sword, I guess it did fall. And Seraphine, she picked up a rock. Because she didn't want to hurt it. She really didn't, but, she didn't want to be unarmed, And so, Thaddeus charged the basilisk and struck it right in the hide, and it howled in anguish. I guess I have to make the sound. Something like that. Work with me. Anyway, this terrible howl, it caused Seraphine to feel sympathy? Sympathy for the beast, yes, sympathy. She realized that it didn't attack, it didn't do anything. Perhaps it was just saying hi, right? So she yelled out to Thaddeus to stop fighting, to which he did for a second, and then quickly realized that he made a mistake, because the basilisk slipped from his grasp, the sword's grasp, rather, and started charging for Seraphine, head on, to which Thaddeus screamed out, "Don't look!" But she looked. Her body slowly began turning to stone, starting at her feet, then her legs, up to her torso. It was terrible. It was paralyzing. She couldn't move. She started to scream, "Help!" Like we were going to do anything, but, she screamed. The basilisk still coming closer and closer. She only had one option left. The basilisk was right on top of her, ready to devour her head. But with her arm that hadn't turned to stone yet, she took the rock and jammed it right in the eye, gouging the entire socket out. The poor basilisk recoiled, for without its eyes it was powerless. I suppose it had its body mass, but you get what I'm saying. And so the magic that had turned her and everyone else to stone faded in an instant. The warriors who had already fallen, well, they remained dead, as, they died anyway. But as for Seraphine, well, guess what? She's fine! The terrible magic that plagued her has been undone. And so, with a sigh of relief on both her and Thaddeus' part, the adventure is now at a pause. That's right. You're going to have to tune in for part 2 and 3 to see what happens next. I'm so awesome like that. See how involved you were. And if you weren't live for me, please, thank you very much. But yes, with that, we are nearing the end of the episode. And as I said, that was part 1. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you come back for more. There's going to be other episodes about other things that aren't this story. So you're going to have to really keep an eye out for it. And, just be consistent. And, it'll all of a sudden pop back up. Woohoo! Tale of Elyerius, part 2. Elyerius. Yeah. Elyerius. My apologies. So with that, it's time for the fun fact of the episode. Did you know that the human teeth are the only part of our bodies that don't heal themselves? It's pretty interesting. I feel like it's also kind of obvious, but something you don't think about. But with that, toodaloo, buckaroos.